Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Hello everyone, welcome to the first lecture of week 5 on modernization and creative communication. In today's lecture, we are going to discuss John Durham Peters' seminal work, Speaking into the Ear, a history of the idea of communication, published in the year 1999. It is an original, erudite and beautifully written book that ensures to alter your thinking about modernization and communication. Speaking into the Ear, a broad history of communication illuminates our expectations of it as both historically specific and a fundamental knot in Western thought. In John Durham Peters' work, The Teaching of Socrates and Jesus, The Theology of St. Augustine, Philosophy in the Wake of Hegel, and the American Tradition from Emerson through William James all become relevant for understanding communication in our age. There are different attributes to what makes us human. Being able to communicate with each other using language is one of them. Though humans were anciently dubbed as the speaking animal by Aristotle, only since the late 19th century we have defined ourselves in terms of our ability to communicate with one another. Since the late 19th century, communication has been explicitly recognized as central to human identity, marking a transformative shift in how humanity understands itself. This evolution has profound intellectual, ethical, and political implications, embedding communication at the core of what it means to be human. Historically, communication was always a fundamental aspect of human life, but it was explicitly theorized in such terms until relatively very recently. We will critically examine the idealized notion of communication as a process of seamless mutual understanding. We will delve into the historical and cultural sources of this ideal and explore the reasons why communication fails to meet these expectations. By analyzing these perceived failures, we will also aim to challenge simplistic views of communication and highlight its complexities, offering deeper insights into the role in shaping human relationship, society, and identities. I would say the difficulty of communication across various social boundaries, gender, class, race, age, religion, region, nation, and language confronts us on daily basis, right? But horizons of incommunicability loom beyond the merely human world as well. In the vexing question of communication with animals, extraterrestrials and smart machines, right? Much in the century's popular culture, especially science fiction, plays on how new symbol processing machines allow for such dangers and delights us as mind control or bodily transport. Likewise, much 20th century drama art, cinema, and literature examine the impossibility of communication between between the people, right? One need only mention such playwrights as O'Neill, Beckett, Sartre, Ionesco, Albee or Havel, or filmmakers such as Bergman or Antonioni or Tarkovsky to evoke senses of stammering face-to-face relations. Intellectuals of all kinds have likewise found in communication a topic with which to explore the outer limits of human connection and to weigh the demands we place on one another. Now, the point is, let's say, Strother Martin's line from the 1967 film Cool Hand Luke, starring Paul Newman, you must have watched that, has assumed an epochal significance. What we have here is failure to communicate, right? Beyond interpersonal relations, the concept extends to animals, extraterrestrials, and machines often explode in popular culture. So communication is not just about transmission, but it is also a representation of societal aspirations and pathos, reflecting modern frustrations with misunderstanding and disconnections. As Hans-Georg Gadamer argues, when you take a word in your mouth, you must realize that you have not taken a tool that can be thrown aside, but you are fixed in a direction of thought which comes from afar and stretches you beyond, right? So, communication problems are deeply intertwined with historical and cultural contexts. Walter Benjamin's distinction between historicism, like viewing history as a continuum, and constructivist historiography, aligning past and present moment, is very important to note here. Historicism, what do you understand by that? Historicism views history as a continuous, objective narrative with a clear progression. It treats the past as a distance and that once upon a time story with no real connection to the present. And the third thing is, it focuses on what? On establishing a universal, eternal picture of historical events. Now, what do you mean by constructivist historicism or historiography? Here, it connects with, or it means, historical materialism. What we do here, or what historical materialism focuses on. It emphasizes the active role of the historian in interpreting the past, considering the present context and its moments of crisis. Number 2, it sees history as a collection of constellations where past and present moments intersect, allowing for a more critical understanding. And third, it aims to blast open the continuum of history, revealing the power dynamics and social forces at play. So, modern concerns with communication are traced back to developments in the 19th and early 20th centuries, where technological advances like the telegraph and radio reframed this concept. So, the term communication evolved from physical transfer to a quasi-physical bridge of ideas and meanings. The modern interpretation of communication as a simultaneous dream and obstacle emerged from societal and technological shifts. It became symbolic of efforts to reconcile self and the other, thought and expression, and private and public spheres. These shifts reflect a broader historical narrative where communication arose as both a response to and a source of societal fractures. As William James noted, the breaches between such thoughts are the most absolute breaches in nature, illustrating the inherent separation within human consciousness. Now, we will now explore some foundational philosophical discussions on communication. Figures like William James highlighted the inherent separateness of individual consciousness, emphasizing that sensory and emotional experiences are uniquely private. While this psychological fact underscores that the natural challenges of communication, the historical and societal implications of such isolation became profound in James's era. Even though today communication might seem a fixed problem for the human species, from cave dwellers to postmoderns, only in James' lifetime, that is between 1842 to 1910, did communication acquire its grandeur and pathos as a concept. So, two words coined in the late 19th century mark his intellectual horizon, I think, very clearly. One is solipsism in 1874. Another word was telepathy, that was introduced in 1882. The later was the brainchild of James's colleague in physical research, Frederick W.H. Myers. Both reflect an individualist culture in which the world surrounding the mind were a problem, whether blissfully thin, which is telepathy, or terrifyingly impermeable, which is called solipsism. You can see one of the pictures over there given on the slide. Okay, since then, communication has simultaneously called up the dream of instantaneous access and the nightmare of the labyrinth of solitude. This dualism of communication at once bridge and chasm across from new technologies and their spiritualist reception, which capped a long tradition of speculating about immaterial mental contact. The tension between solipsism, radical individualism, and telepathy, instant mental connection, encapsulates the dual nature of communication. Technological metaphors such as radio frequencies and this tuning reinforce the idea that communication is fraught with disruptions. These metaphors reflect broader cultural anxieties about connection and isolation in a rapidly modernizing world. So, the term communication is multifaceted, encompassing number one, I would say, imparting the information about the word communication. Now, rooted in Latin origins, we all know from the Latin word communicare, the word communication has arrived. Communicare, which means to impart or share or make things look common. It entered the English language in the 14th or the 15th centuries. The key root is mun, not uni. So, commune, mun, and not the uni care. Okay, related to such words as munificent or community, meaning and gem shaft. This involves sharing tangible or intangible items, often in one transmissions. Then we would talk about the exchanges and reciprocities. Why I say so? Because this sense implies mutuality and interaction, extending from casual conversation to deep interpersonal understanding. And then there is something called the connection and linkage. Historically, this word is used to describe physical connection. Say for example, steam communication. It later developed into metaphors for interpersonal and societal bonds. And then we come for this transmission. Communication as the transfer of messages, thoughts, or even disease, right? Emphasizing the mechanical and impersonal aspects of the process. While communication often connotes the shared understanding, its historical uses and philosophical interpretations reveal tension, I would say, between unity and separation, interaction and isolation. Now we are going to trace on 5 central theoretical visions of communication from the 1920s, a period of intense intellectual engagement with this topic. So, to go about it, the first one, mass communication and propaganda. Thinkers like Walter Lippmann and Edward Bernays viewed communication as a tool of managing public opinion, raising concerns about manipulation and democracy. Lippmann, for instance, argued that popular irrationality could be both malleable and intransigent. Industrialization, urbanization, and societal rationalization, psychological research, and novel instruments of communication all provided unprecedented conditions for the manufacture of consent among dispersed populations. Now, the experience of the First World War, moreover, proved that symbols are not just aesthetic ornaments but prime movers of social organization. Strategically cultivated perceptions lost or won battles and sent men in the trenches to their grave. Now, the meaning of meaning in the book, The Meaning of Meaning by the Cambridge critics C.K. Ogden and I. Richards, is probably the best exhibit of this view, and even more of the dominant view of communication as the accurate sharing of consciousness. Ogden and Richards proposed scientific approaches to reduce miscommunication, emphasizing rationality and precision. They noted words are at present a very imperfect means of communication. Now, this is really something to think about. Now, we would see communication as an ideal and a challenge. Even we continue with the same. There are barriers and failures, right? Modernist literature and philosophy, exemplified by T.S. Eliot and Kafka, highlighted the impossibility of perfect communication, often depicting isolation and breakdown. Eliot's The Wasteland poignantly captures this with lines like, "We think of the key, each in his precision," right? So, Heidegger and Berber viewed communication as revealing otherness and forming relationships rather than merely transmitting information. Heidegger emphasized that, I quote, "Communication entails bearing oneself in such a way that one is open to hearing others' otherness," I unquote. So, even in the same lines, when we talk about the pragmatic aspect of it, pragmatic action, John Dewey considered, or he emphasized, communication as participation in shared activities, framing it as essential to community building and democracy. Each vision addresses specific aspect of communication, from technical transmission to existential connection, reflecting diverse intellectual and cultural concerns. Now, we will now talk about something about the post-war developments. Now, the late 1940s marked a critical juncture for communication studies, influenced by information theory and therapeutic communication. Now, what about information theory? Claude Shannon's work on telecommunication refined communication as the mathematical transmission of signals, expanding its application across disciplines. Now, Shannon distinguished between signal and significance, which profoundly shaped communication theory, and nowadays we teach Shannon-Weaver's model, and this was the source, right? And then we had this therapeutic communication. Figures like Carl Rogers emphasized communication's role in personal and societal healing, framing it as both as method and a goal for improving relationships. Roger posited psychotherapy, I quote, "Psychotherapy is good communication between and within men," I unquote. So, communication has dual character: technical precision and interpersonal healing. I repeat, technical precision and interpersonal healing. These approaches reinforce the dual character of communication as both a technical and interpersonal phenomena. Post-war anxieties about isolation, manipulation, and the role of mass media underscored the stakes of communication in a nuclear age. Now, we will now critique the pervasive belief in communication redemptive power. The power of seamless understanding, whether through technological advances or therapeutic methods, it is seen as a flawed pursuit. Communication, it argues, is inherently fraught with gaps and failures. Yet, these very imperfections are what make human communication meaningful. Levinas's philosophy offers a radical reinterpretation. Communication's failures reveal the irreducible otherness of individual, fostering respect and ethical engagement. Communication is a form of responsibility towards others as a representation of the face of others, even the face of God. Communication ethics is a form of responsibility in opening up and accepting others to build mutual peace. Communication is not merely about exchanging information, but rather a deeply ethical act when one must be open to the other and their unique alterity, essentially prioritizing listening and responding to the needs of the other person with a profound sense of responsibility, and even when it disrupts one's own self-understanding. This concept is often described as the face of the other, which demands our ethical consideration above everything else. Now, Martin Heidegger similarly rejects the idea of communication as mental transfer, emphasizing the shared world that precedes linguistic expression. These perspectives challenge the instrumental and idealized views of communication, advocating for a more nuanced understanding of its ethical and existential dimensions. According to Heidegger, communication is deeply intertwined within the concept of being and is primarily understood through language, which he views as the house of being, a fundamental way to access and reveal the world around us. Essentially, communication is not just exchange of information, but a shared act of interpretation and interpreting and understanding existence through language, where authenticity and a deep connection to the world are crucial elements. Now, say for example, in T.S. Eliot's The Waste Land, communication breakdowns serve as a powerful metaphor for the existential crisis faced by individuals in a fragmented post-war society. The poem illustrates how disconnectedness, both in personal relationship and broader social context, reflect the confusion, despair, and sense of paralysis that characterize modern existence. Eliot captures the disillusionment prevalent in the wake of the First World War, showing how the inability to communicate effectively mirrors deeper existential dilemmas and the search for meaning in a chaotic world order. In Kafka's The Castle, again, if you can see, endless miscommunication is a central narrative theme that highlights the alienation and struggles of individuals trying to navigate a confusing and unresponsive bureaucracy. Characters frequently find themselves trapped in a web of misunderstandings, emphasizing their sense of isolation and frustration as they attempt to connect with a very opaque system that seems indifferent to their needs. This theme resonates with readers by reflecting real feelings, real senses of being lost within complex societal structures. Again, in the novel like To the Lighthouse by Virginia Woolf, Woolf explores gender and communication through the distinct perspectives of her characters, highlighting the complexities of gender roles. Each character grapples with societal expectations and personal identity, particularly about the personal identity through the characters like Lily and Briscoe, who resist traditional gender binaries and critiques male dominance. This struggle emphasizes an exploration of self and the relation between the men and the woman, revealing the nuanced nature of gender interaction within the context of her time. So, we can conclude by reflecting on the enduring tensions in communication theory, the dangers of reducing communication to technical efficiency or therapeutic harmony, rather than it must be advocated or it advocates for embracing the complexity and unpredictability of human interaction. Communication is less about achieving perfect understanding and more about navigating differences, building relationship, and creating shared worlds. We can rethink communication as a dynamic and relational process, one that resists easy solutions and demand ongoing ethical and political engagement. Thank you.